what we do at Solar Systems, a company that I founded about 20 years ago, is we're trying to deal with one of the major issues of solar energy, and that's its high cost. And secondly, we're also looking at the storage issue. And what we did was to, at that time, look at all the different technologies around and try to pick the best bits out of those technologies and put them together. So we've just mentioned solar thermal and we've mentioned PV. Both of those systems have drawbacks. What we've actually done is taken some of the best elements out of PV. That is the great reliability and the elegance of turning photons directly into electricity, and the cost-reducing capability of concentrators, where you have a cheap collector concentrate the energy and then convert that energy form. So I've got a couple of presentations here that were prepared for a slightly different audience. So what I'll do is just run through those, and at the end we'll have some questions. All right, we're multi-tiered. Okay, for those of you who know anything about Solar Systems, the company started in 1990 here in Melbourne for the purpose of developing a utility scale technology which could be comparable to grid power, fossil grid power that we pay that we buy now, which has got a generation cost of typically about 3 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour at the point of generation. And if you then look at the cost of transporting that energy, say, to somewhere like Melbourne or even to Broken Hill, where you've got to allow for the loss factors and the wheeling costs, that number can go up to perhaps 12 cents, maybe even 15 cents in some cases. So we're targeting a levelized cost of energy of around about 10 to 12 cents per kilowatt hour in the next 3 to 5 years. And in the process of doing that, we've done a number of projects in Australia. We have a manufacturing and R&D facility in Melbourne, and one up at Bridgewater near Bendigo. A lot of people ask us, why do we bother to take this pathway? As you can see there, the world record for the best photovoltaic cells, 42.8%. That's a phenomenal number. The solar panel you can buy off the shelf is typically about 14 or 15% efficiency. So that's one of the reasons we're in this part of the technology game. And the theoretical limit for that technology is about 60%. So what that means is, if you can get the base technology running and you continue to develop the cell technology, you can improve that from today's present system efficiency of about 28% up to perhaps 50%, which will be enough to drop the cost to about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. That little yellow square is the size of desert we'd need to cover in Australia, or indeed in any major desert, or it could be cut up and distributed around the world to supply all of the world's energy. So that's the electrical energy, the gas, the coal, every single little bit of it. And as you can see, the solar resource is phenomenally big. It's also very widespread. That's another very good reason to be in solar. Specifically, the issues that make solar energy expensive are that the energy is very low density. So when we compare it to the level of radiation that comes from nuclear, for example, or the amount of energy that comes out of a kilo of coal, it's very, very low. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge has been that historically the conversion efficiency has been very low as well. And if that's not enough, the supply is intermittent on top of that. So there's three pretty big challenges there that have to be dealt with. We have focused on the first two of those, and we have some actions happening in the third one. So that is And to deal with the first one, we use concentration. So if you take a low energy stream and you concentrate that, you make a high energy density stream, you can afford to do some more exotic and sophisticated things with that to get a better result. And one of those things is you could afford, for example, to use a very high performance solar panel to have a very high conversion efficiency. And that picture on the on your left there gives a shot of the present technology, where we have a cheap collector. It's just mirrors. They're all spherical. They're positioned in a paraboloidal shape, and they focus all that energy onto the receiver. We've got and you can see there 500 suns intensity of light going into that receiver, where there's a bank of solar cells, about 1,600 cells, that convert that energy at about 32% efficiency directly into electrical power. So you've got a solar panel that's this big that can put out 35 kilowatts. In order to achieve this just gives a little bit of insight into some of the challenges. We have to deal with a concentrated solar beam that can melt steel, or in this case copper. That's a piece of 6mm copper that was cooled in one of our early experiments. We put that up there in about 12 seconds. It burned a hole right through that. So this was sort of like the agony and the ecstasy. We thought, well, right, we've got some power here, but we've been running this story that we're going to put solar cells in there and make them survive and last for 20 years. So that's what I've been doing for the last 19 years, is making those survive. And the reason for that is that the natural shape of the intensity of a parabolic dish beam, it looks like this is a very peaky and intense beam, peaking at several thousand suns. In fact, it's hot enough to melt ceramics. So part of what we have done is develop the optical system so that we can have a relatively flat and even distribution across the cells, about 500 suns, so they work quite happily. The system showing the principle pretty well. So these are just pretty much ordinary mirrors, and all the complex stuff is in that little box there. So the idea is that you use mostly low-tech materials with a bit of knowledge about optics, and a very high-tech converter that can turn the result of that low-tech collector into high-efficiency energy. One of the little discoveries that we made along the way is that contrary to the way most things go in thermodynamics, and in particular the real world, the efficiency of a solar cell actually goes up when you drive it harder. Usually when you drive things harder, the efficiency goes down. In this case, what you'll see here is that the bottom axis shows the concentration ratio. It's a logarithmic scale. That's at 1 sun. This particular cell had an efficiency of 31%. At about 250 suns, you can see it's got an efficiency of 37%. So it's one of those little bonuses that you find hidden in nature if you look hard enough, and that's one of the things that helps this technology along. That's one of the power stations that we've built, and a number of those stations. So these are progressively over the years. Some of you may have even heard about the White Cliffs Power Station. This was built by Professor Steve Caniff of ANU about almost 30 years ago. We came along about 15 years ago after it was decommissioned and converted what was then a thermal plant. So it used solar thermal. It had an output of about 25 kilowatts. We put our technology in and upgraded that to 40 kilowatts. And that really exemplifies what we're talking about. The combination of concentrators and high performance PV can give you a very, very high efficiency. The map shows the power stations that we've put together so far over the last 10 years. just a couple of shots of one of the power stations. So the inverter room, the dishes put out DC power at about 260 volts DC. This is a rack of inverters that convert that to 3-phase 415 volt, which is then transformed up to 33 kV to go into the grid. The system is engineered pretty much like a power station, like a conventional power station, and we monitor all the active components in the system. So this is just a shot of one of the control panels of one of the dishes. You can see the power at this time, 28 kilowatts coming out of that dish. At that time, an overall efficiency of 22.3%, so that includes all the optical losses, all the parasitics, all the losses that associated with the system. The optical efficiency, for example, about 90%, a very high number. That's a group shot there where it's we've got a summary of all the dishes, so that the main indicators, if you like, of the condition of each of the dishes in that power station. That shows what the AC power bus is doing and what the cooling system is doing. So it's just like any other power station. You can manage it, you can control it, you can log it, and you can proactively maintain it. I mentioned before the unique capabilities that are starting to show up out of PV cells. This graph, this has got time on the bottom axis and efficiency on the y-axis, and this shows the efficiency of best-in-world laboratory scale technology for different types of cell technologies. And it's interesting to see that all of the technologies other than this one are actually rolling off in efficiency over time, and these ones that haven't actually posted anything for the last few years haven't actually increased at all. So what we're seeing is somewhat of a saturation of the efficiency for a lot of the known technologies. So this is our own UNSW showing around about 24% there, and the very best solar panel in the world is pushing 20% these days. It's fairly expensive, but you can buy one at that level. The technology that we use is on this line, and as you can see, the efficiency increase is actually accelerating as time goes on. So this is suggesting to us that our ultimate target of 50 to 60% is indeed going to be met, and presently that efficiency is almost 43%. It's one thing to actually develop a technology and make it work, the other thing is to convert it into a product and have that work reliably and have it work for many, many years. So part of what we've been doing over the last 10 years is to deploy this technology into power stations and run that and deal with all the issues that come up in the real world and gradually iterate through that so that we now have a design that's very robust. Beyond that, we're also thinking about gigawatt scale production and looking for the absolute cheapest and most maintainable form in which this technology could be deployed. And at this point in time, it looks like it may well be a heliostat-based technology. And the reason for that is that you can put a very large amount of high technology in a small box, put it onto a tower, and you can make many thousands of relatively small collectors, in this case heliostats, which are just mirrors that track the sun. They can be highly prefabricated, and that means that the installation cost, which is one of the major costs of this sort of technology, is minimised. So what we've been doing in the last couple of years is developing a heliostat version of the technology, and I'll show you that in the second presentation. In order to address the other issue of solar energy, which is the intermittent nature of that, we've looked at generation of hydrogen that could be stored and For example, be put back through a fuel cell and produce electricity for use on demand, or indeed be used as a fuel. And when you look at what's happened in the past, the efficiency of that process is generally very, very low. Typically, if you have your normal PV system might have an efficiency of perhaps 10% at the system level, an electrolyser might be 60% efficient at the system level, your power matching might be 95%, and your storage, compressors, etc. might be 95%. So at the end of the day, you end up with an overall efficiency of about 5%, and that just blows the cost out of the water. What we have developed here, and there's a small scale example of this, is a unique system where we actually take the electricity that is generated by the photovoltaic cells here, just like in the big dish, and we also split out the spectrum from this and capture the infrared radiation, and we put both of those energy forms, and there's the infrared radiation and a bit of visible coming out of this light guide. We put those two energy forms together into an electrolyser, ceramic electrolyser, which is run at high temperature, and you can get an extraordinarily high efficiency out of that, at least double what you would get out of a conventional electrolyser. It's possible to get a system efficiency of over 50%, in other words 10 times higher than what's been demonstrated by some of the other techniques, the more conventional techniques in the past. So what that means is that there is a possibility that this technology could be used to either make hydrogen fuel or to be used at, I think, moderate scale storage. And this just shows a schematic of how that happens. So we have the full solar spectrum incident on the concentrator, which concentrates that to the receiver. In here there's a spectrum splitter. The visible goes through to the solar cells, and they produce their electricity, and the infrared radiation is reflected back through the centre in this case, and the two energy forms are combined in the electrolyser. So that was the first one. This is another presentation that we gave at the IEEE conference in Philadelphia earlier this year, announcing the world's first heliostat CPV system. So instead of having a thermal receiver, a turbine, a generator, which typically has an efficiency, system efficiency of less than 15%, we put a system together that showed an efficiency, a DC efficiency of about 25% and an AC efficiency of over 20, probably about 22%. So this is a real breakthrough in terms of getting the cost down of solar energy. This little equation is worth looking at. As far as energy is concerned, this is one of the major metrics by which energy is measured, and that's the levelized cost of energy. And regardless of how the energy is sourced, this equation takes all the costs into account to run a generating plant for its lifetime, and expresses that as a quotient of the output, the energy output of the plant over its lifetime. A couple of other measures, of course, are how much pollution it produces in its lifetime, or expressed perhaps another way is the energy payback time as well. And we've recently done an examination of our system. The energy payback time is around about 1 year, which is similar to wind. And in fact, if we refurbish the system every, say, 20 years, which is quite possible, this could have the lowest embedded energy or the lowest carbon footprint for any technology that exists presently, apart from ideal hydro. And as we know, hydro is getting harder and harder and harder to do. So this equation will be seen and talked about a lot more over the next 10, 15 years. This is perhaps worth a look. This is almost actual size. We produce a small module that's about this big, that's has an output of about 600 watts. So it has an output that would be, in normal solar panel terms, an output as big as solar panels, probably as big as those two screens put together. In fact, probably 4 of those. The output is about 1,500 times greater per square centimetre, and the efficiency is double to triple what your standard solar panel is, and that's really the enabling technology that makes this all work. This one gives an indication of the advancements we've made over the last 3 years. This is intensity. Now this is showing a different part of the concentration curve to what I showed you earlier on. When the intensity gets very high, the efficiency actually starts to go down again. You can see that, and this is 100 suns here. This, if you multiply this number by 10 on the bottom, it gives you the equivalent of suns. And as we can see, over the years we've gradually increased the efficiency, and we've also increased the efficiency at very high intensity as well. So you can see that we run at 500 watts per square metre, or 500 kilowatts per square metre, or 500 suns presently. You can see a few years ago, if we try to increase that, we would have lost efficiency, but the latest version is actually able to hold that efficiency up. So it could be quite practical to run at even 800 or 1,000 suns before too long, and that'll just have the effect of reducing the cost even further. This gives the output of one of these dishes over a day, and you can see the rather nice flat profile. So on a good clear day you come up to maximum power very quickly, and it runs at full power pretty much for most of the day. And what that does is it means that your balance of system can be very well matched and utilised. Typically a flat plate system might have a larger peak in the middle and be carved off at the edges. You have to size your balance of system for the maximum output, and that's cost that's not being utilised most of the time. So this lends itself to optimising the balance of system very, very well. Something of interest here is one of the challenges with concentrator systems is that the thing has to track the sun almost perfectly within probably 0.1 degree accuracy all the time. This shot just shows excuse me, the influence of wind. So this is wind speed here, about 11 metres a second, so about 40 kilometres per hour, and you can see there's relatively little effect on the output power due to the wind effect. This is some long-term data. So over the last few years, so this is from April 2007, at the Hermannsburg power station, we've been gradually improving the technology, and this is DC system efficiency on the right hand side. So you can see that we're averaging about 24–25% DC system efficiency, and this includes all the goods and all the bads that happen in the field. So downtime, dirt, bad weather, grid failures, everything. This power station is connected to a small grid at Hermannsburg. The solar power station puts out about 120 kilowatts, and the diesel station typically puts out 100 to perhaps 250. So we're actually a major portion of the grid sometimes, and that brings with it new requirements that have to be met in terms of grid stability. So we've developed the technology to be able to stabilise the grid when you're more than 50% of that, And that also goes forward to when we're thinking about a high penetration into the grid. At the moment, solar power generation in grids around the world is less than 0.01%, so it's not really an issue, but we hope that becomes an issue in the next 5 to 10 years, so we need to prepare for that now. A little bit of philosophy about the differences between a dish approach and a heliostat approach. The dish, while it is the most efficient form of solar power collection and conversion technology that there is in the world today, it may not be the cheapest. This type of layout with a much leaner receiver, this is actually a test bed that we use to test systems here. So there's a whole room on top of this tower. Normally in an industrial scale version there would be just the equivalent of a cell phone tower with that little bright bit on top of it. This type of approach has a cost that may be 20 to 30% cheaper. The efficiency is about 5% less, but on balance you still come out a fair way in front. Somebody mentioned they'd driven past our test station at Bridgewater near Bendigo. That's an aerial shot of that, and that shows the heliostat field here. So you can see the two technology embodiments there. The dish, so that's a 35 kilowatt dish, and this is about 160 kilowatt heliostat field. As you can see, heliostats are much simpler than the dish. The dish has basically hot and cold running water. It has a control system. It has low voltage power, high voltage power. It's quite a sophisticated piece of work. The heliostat it's got just enough brains for it to track the sun, and that's all. The mirrors are virtually flat. And so this represents the cheapest possible collector that can be built. So the challenge is to use that really cheap collector and keep the efficiency high and the cost down. That gives you a feel for what is happening in the receiver. So the aperture of this is about 1.7 metres, and at the back of that aperture, behind a mirrored kaleidoscope, is about a 1 square metre panel of solar cells, putting out about 140 kilowatts in this case. And that's the actual data that we recorded on a couple of specific days, showing there an efficiency. In this case, we're a little bit over the optimum design point. So we had a direct normal incidence power of 1086. I don't know how many of you are aware of that. That's pretty bright. Normally 1000 is about the peak that you might see, giving a DC efficiency of 24%. And in this case, when the sun intensity is more like average, about 26% there, with an optical efficiency of 84%, and the target was about 86%. So the numbers came in pretty well on that. I mentioned.
Just maybe a couple of minutes to wrap up, and then get some questions.
Sure.
That'd be great.
Okay. I mentioned manufacturing before. We've just put together a 500 megawatt per annum production plant in our facility at Abbotsford. So that's just been finished and will be ramped up next year. And that's a fully automated plant. So this is really a world scale plant. Some of the biggest operators in the world, for example, SunPower, Suntech, or First solar have capacities of around about 3/4 of a gigawatt, so we're starting to approach that. And that's one of the unique things about concentrators. This plant cost us $30 million to put a 500 megawatt plant together. To put together a 500 megawatt per annum plant of normal solar panels would cost you $500 million. So it's one of the unique things about concentrator systems that makes it easier to fund, to ramp up and to get working. So I'll take some questions.
With that formula you had before with the cost versus wattage for the whole life of the system, how does that compare to other renewables like wind or wave power or things like that?
Yeah, okay, good question. How does the LCOE for this technology compared to others? So the LCOE for coal power is, typically 3 to 7 cents. For gas, it's probably 5 to 15. For most PV, typical PV, say a small rooftop PV, it would be more like 50 to 60 cents. And for large scale PV, it would be something like 25, 30 cents. And the numbers that we are at now for those relatively small stations you see are around about 20 to 30 cents, depending on the installation. And we're targeting about 15 in the next year and a half and about 10 to 12 in the next 2 years after that. Solar thermal would be around about 20 odd cents. Quite often there are subsidies mixed in with these things as well, and with subsidies you can often get a number that comes down below 10 cents. And if we put in the subsidies that the US government is offering presently and tax concessions and accelerated depreciation, we could hit 10 cents within 2 years, meaning that provided that government support is there, this kind of technology could be highly competitive in just a few years.
I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about what you were mentioning before in the
Hermannsburg, yeah.
Hermannsburg connection. I was just curious, what problems you face with power quality that you're giving to the grid? Do you have to do anything in particular to make sure that your power is the same quality as what the grid is requiring? And also, what would that be like for a mainly coal powered grid?
Yep. The big challenge that you have with solar is it's a variable resource. So in a coal station, you ramp it up over perhaps a few days and you might hold it there for even months. In our case, in minutes or even seconds, the amount of resource could change. So the thing we have to deal with is if you're a large portion of the grid and there's a rapid change in the solar resource, you have to deal with that. And there's two things that we've done with that. One is to be able to actually predict what's going to happen and ramp it down first, and the other one is to provide a battery buffer. So at a couple of those power stations we have conventional battery buffers in there that have got about 20 minutes storage capacity. And so what happens then is if the sun drops out, they actually maintain the power. They ramp it down gently, and we've got a link with the power station that ramps the diesels up, and that takes over. So it's a cooperative approach that we take.
Two questions. First one is, what is your thoughts on the viability of those solar concentrators that are using the Stirling engines in the receiver? And second one was, you showed that picture of the copper plate that belted through. What happens if between the receiver and the concentrator you get a bird that flies through?
That's a good question. For some reason they don't seem to do it. Maybe that's because we're in the desert and there aren't many out there. We do have a couple of photographs of cockatoos sitting right on the receiver, and perhaps they've got a really good sense of smell. If their feathers start to fringe a little bit, they fly away. So we haven't had any bird issues. of that type. I mean, if you did it here in Melbourne, you might have, but it's the thing about being in the desert. There's virtually nothing out there. Sorry, what was the other question?
The viability of the...
Oh, the Stirling. Stirling engines have had great promise for the last 25 years, and I think they've still got great promise. Reliability appears to be the issue. The world record for any solar technology was set about 25 years ago, and to be honest, I'm a little bit dubious about that world record. It's just been bettered slightly. I think it was 29.5% efficiency for a short time in ideal conditions. It was just bettered recently after 25 years to about 31 and a bit percent, I think. But there are no Stirling power stations running anywhere that I'm aware of. So I think, considering that the technology that we've developed, for example, will very soon be more efficient than that, you'd have to ask yourself the question, why would you have an engine that has moving components that has an efficiency of 30%? Why would you do that compared to a solid state device that's got the same efficiency and runs at 55 degrees centigrade compared to something that is moving and runs at 550 degrees centigrade? So my feeling is that whatever market there is for that kind of thing will probably be eclipsed by CPV, I think.
With the hydrogen storage system, how far advanced is that in terms of actually using it? And with the cost, I mean, would adding this storage on increase the cost of electricity or decrease it? Because it's my understanding it's not solar thermal, but adding storage will actually decrease the cost of the electricity.
It'll never decrease the cost. It might improve the profitability, because it depends on how you're being paid. If you've got a situation where you can be paid more for power that you deliver, for example, later in the day or just after dark, then the economics might be there. And a number of plants have got power purchase agreements that anticipate that and do make it valuable. In the system that I showed there, it's only been done at that very small scale, but the principles have all been proved, and it's a cellular modular approach. So in order to scale it up, it's a bit like PV. If you can show it with one bit, you just make 1,000 of them, and the efficiency is actually the same regardless of the size. So what we've seen there is that, yes, it costs more to add the other stuff onto it, but the efficiency in this case actually goes up a little bit because we capture the energy that otherwise would have been wasted. So it tends to offset that.
Just leading on from the hydrogen question, so I've done quite a bit of research into hydrogen early on in my PhD, and sort of gave up on that slide because there are a lot of pretty big problems that you run into. Firstly, around even if you manage to get quite a high efficiency on the production of hydrogen, you still have to compress it, you still have to store it. The energy density of hydrogen is very low, so you need to compress it a lot. And then there's the conversion back into some useful form of energy, which is also a problem with safety and storage.
Sure.
Everything else, along with the cost. So I was just wondering, you've got eggs in other baskets when it comes to storage. Have you looked at steam turbines or molten salts or any other form of storage with the concentrated thesis?
Yeah, it's possible for us to co-generate with a number of different things. So with the spectrum splitter, we could actually create heat as well. We could even do something like compress air, right? So compress air and collect that waste heat during the day, store that, and then when you let the air back out, you heat the air, and you could just about get a one-for-one storage like that. So we're talking with a number of people around the world about those types of things as well. So yeah, but the hydrogen thing is a you know, it's a very snazzy sounding thing. It's not a simple mission to do, but as time goes on, technology in a lot of other areas moves on, and sometimes you know, what's possible today or not possible today might be possible in a couple of years' time. So we haven't taken it off the list. The other thing is that if you look at the case of a fuel cell charged electric car, we think we could make hydrogen fuel at the same cost as gasoline is around about now, right? So there may be a case for that, right? And I mean, it's so it would cost no more than gasoline. It would be pretty much perfectly clean, and in a high efficiency hybrid vehicle, the quantity that you might need is actually quite low. So I don't think there's going to be any big bang solutions, but you can approach it from 5 or 6 different ways, and you can see that there are certain potential markets in an area.
Is there a minimum size that's economical to create this? Or could you create, say, 2 or 3 kilowatt ones for remote farms and whatnot? Or?
At this stage, it's big. That's why they're big. You know, it's a complicated thing. So it's at this stage, it's too complicated to have. And you saw that little dish. I mean, that's where I started 20 years ago, and that works. You know, that could produce, or say one this big, would be quite capable of producing a kilowatt and a couple of kilowatts of heat. So in theory, it could run, but it tracks the sun and it's got active cooling and all that. At this stage, it's probably not, I would just say, rationalised enough to do on a house, but you know, maybe a few years it could be. The other thing is that studies done by people other than us have shown that for the same types of technology, the cost in a large central plant, grid connected, is massively cheaper. It's usually half the price of small, you know, on-roof type things. Sorry, there was somebody up there who's...
Yep. I've got a question about when you've got those sort of concentration traders out in Hermannsburg and Lasich and places like that.
Yep.
I'd probably like to get your contact because I'm working on a research project for remote communities on these type of systems. You're there because obviously the cost of production, so is it actually does it work out less than the price of producing power by diesel for the power work?
Indeed. So
is it cost effective now?
Yep.
And how do you deal with maintenance issues in remote areas? Is it a challenge?
It is a challenge. At the moment, I'll answer the cost of diesel generated power up there is about 60 cents a kilowatt hour, and we're producing it for 30. In fact, a little less than that, and we're being paid a bit more than that. So we're actually making a little bit of money out of those plants. The O&M is a challenge because they're so remote. And I showed those shots of the data acquisition system. So we can sit in our office here and we can analyse the system from there. We can see every single active component. And so what we do is they run, say, for 10 days on their own, and we have a routine visit. We've got a couple of guys in Northern Territory that go around 5 power stations there and spend a couple of days at each one and make sure everything keeps running.